Okay, so rich volcanic soil, fruit forward.
Well, it's producing, because you got that rich soil, you're getting a lot more richness to the wine, is a good way to explain it. Okay? Then let's go and let's take as an example, because it's one of my favorites, South Africa. You take a South African wine that is completely covered in clay. The soil is red. There's tons of minerals in the soil. It's nutrient rich. And when you taste the wine, you can taste the minerality to it. You can taste clay and different types of spices, and it's all influenced. No, but it's wonderful. It's this full flavored, different texture, and you're getting more nuances on a completely different type of wine. And the only change is really the soil. And you go into the other big elements, terrain. We were talking about, whether you do it lower in a farm field or up high in the mountains, whether you have a lot of wind that's blowing across or whether you have a lot of rain or a little bit of rain, Those all kind of go into affecting what grapes grow in what areas and how they grow better or worse. Sun exposure is another really important one. A grape needs a certain amount of sun exposure to be able to grow well. That's why you find all the vineyards are on the 45th parallel, whether it's the north or south parallels. They all grow within about 5 degrees of parallel.
Oh, Traverse City, that makes sense.
All grapes.
Leelanau Peninsula is on the 45th parallel.
Any good wines you know are all on the 45th parallel. Or
hey,
right
I'm
alongside.
so sorry.
Yeah,
you're not the only one that forgot about it
Okay.
today. Melanie's running late too.
Okay, I got roped into taking a boat to Charlotte early this morning, and it just threw my whole day off. So.
Yeah.
I saw City Park Wine, and I was like, oh, that wine tasting.
Yup, wine tasting.
Completely forgot.
We're actually not tasting wine today, we're talking about wine.
Talking about wine?
Yeah. So regional influences are always going to affect how grapes are going to taste, obviously, right? The other thing that really affects it is cultural influences. You take, for example, and I'm going to talk about the old world here, because they really show it. They pick their certain areas, like the Burgundy region or the Rhone region of France, and they say, these grapes grow best here, so these are the only grapes we're going to let you grow, because this is what the soil works best with. Then they have all these different types of traditions that say, blending the grapes this way are going to produce this flavor and this type of blend that we're looking for. Or they're going to say that they want them only to be harvested at certain times of the year. So those are cultural influences. So that way that in France, a lot of your wine is going to have a lot of mossy, mushroom type aftertastes. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that rich, super complex wine that just has more nuances than you can imagine. You go over the mountains into Spain, and it's completely different. Their whole culture says more of, we want big wines, this is table wines, all we drink is wine. And they do have their set regions of, this region needs to produce this type of wine, but there's a lot more open-mindedness, and there's a lot more of, okay, well, even though you can only grow Tempranillo, you can bottle it any way you choose, as long as it's just Tempranillo. And so what happens is you can go to like a Rioja, and all Riojas, when you taste them, are all going to be big, heavy, weighty wines. But there's a big difference between the Rioja that we had on the 10 for 10 last week, the Crin Roja, which was slightly sweet, it was fruit forward, and it had a little bit of smoke and spice to it, as opposed to some of the Riojas that are on our wine list that are huge, full-flavored, meaty, chewy, smoky, and they literally are just so jam-packed of concentrated weight that you really feel that you cannot even touch that without having food in your mouth at the same time, because it just overpowers everything in the mouth. And that's the beauty of that area. Things are a little bit more up and down, but it's the cultural influence of saying, hey, we're allowing you to do that. You go into the Americas, Australia, South America, and it's basically free reign. You can make whatever you want based on whatever your personal profiles are. So that's what we're going to start talking about, is New World wines.
So those two were considered Old World wines?
Yeah, those are just Old World habits. You start getting into, and we're not going to skip over most of the Old World in general, because really our wine list is 95% New World, and there's no need to go into the French, Spanish, Italian today, because we really don't have a lot of that today that we really need to go over. There's not much to represent on the wine list.
Unless it's a peach here.
Very rarely. And then honestly, I'm trying to phase out what little European wines.
There's been a couple Spanish.
There's been a couple Spanish ones, just because Spanish you can get such a good deal on.
Okay. Sorry, I'll show you.
Okay. So we're going to start with the Americas, and we're going to just kind of work our way around the globe talking about different grapes, what grapes grow there, and I really want to start asking a lot of questions about why these grapes are growing really well. So let's start with California. California is easily the largest grape producer in the States. They supply more than 75% of all the wine in the States. And there's reasons for that, you know. It's a very lush, it's a fertile area. There's more growing land in that state than just about anywhere else. You look at Oregon, you look at Washington, you look at Michigan. We just don't have that much land mass to be able to make. We can make good wines in the little tiny space that we have, but they just have. We can fit states in the amount of land that they have available to them. We just don't have it. California is amazing in that. So let's talk about some of the wines that they're most known for. So I'm going to go around. Tell me a wine that comes from California that's popular in California. So, Krista? No?
Cabernet.
Absolutely. Cabernet is one of the largest growing wines.
Yeah, it is.
One of the biggest grapes. What about South America? It's another big one. Merlot is actually a pretty big one. It's used a little bit more as a blending grape. It used to be huge. It's losing, honestly, it's losing fashion as a result of movies, cultural influences. So as a result, they're growing less of it, and they're using
in general, or just
in general, in the Americas in general, they're using less of it. They're also using it more as a blending grape than they are as a single varietal. It used to be back in the day that they would just make Merlot, and you could go to any store and people would ask for Merlot because that was what was good, it was what was great. You know, and Merlot is a great medium to heavy bodied, fruit forward wine that always tastes good. It's reliable. Nowadays, people have kind of shifted their attention to some of the other newer grapes that are in the market, and we're going to talk about those as we go along. Another couple big ones, Chardonnay. It's huge, and California is one of the most popular areas in the States to produce it. Pinot Noir, not as big as, say, Cabernet or Merlot, but it has its definite following, and it is pretty well produced, especially in certain areas like Russian River Valley, some of the northern counties. The other grape that's really largely produced in that area is Sauvignon Blanc, or if you get into some of the Robles regions, Syrah, Grenache, those type of peppery things. There's one other really big grape I haven't said. Zinfandel. And Zinfandel is kind of unique. It is California's claim to fame. It is their grape, and you don't really see it represented anywhere else in the world. Maybe as a blending grape, but just California loves to do their Zinfandels, and there's reasons for that. You know, it just grows best in California. So let's talk about the biggest ones. The biggest ones here are Cab, Chardonnay, Merlot, Zinfandel, and probably Pinot to a lesser extent. And these are the big grapes. Now they all actually don't grow in the same area. You can't go to Napa and just get all of these grapes. People do. They try all the time. You get these rich superstar celebrities that don't know much about wine, and they'll just say, I'm going to grow Pinot Noir down in Santa Barbara over by LA. And you know what? They grow it, and it tastes horrible. You have to grow certain grapes in certain regions. Because some grapes grow great and they flourish, and in other areas they don't. Typically, so we're going to start with the two biggest ones, Cab and Chardonnay. They both like cooler climates. They want a lot of sun. They don't want it too hot. They need a cool evening. So they grow best over in which valley? In California, we hear all the time being used.
The Willamette. No, that's in Oregon.
That's in Oregon. Starts with an N.
Starts with an N?
An N.
No. I don't remember.
Napa's to the north. It's over by San Francisco. And the reason that Napa makes Chardonnays and Cabs so well is because in the evenings, all the fog and the cool ocean air gets blown right over into the fields. And what that does is it has a cooling effect on all the grapes, so that they're not overheating and they have a chance to cool off and continue to grow. If you go farther to the south, they don't get that same effect from the oceans. And what happens is it literally bakes the wine, and it changes the whole composition. But with a Napa wine, and those two are easily the most famous, you know, there's a lot of human influences that go into what makes them great. You know, a very common characteristic you see in a lot of Napa wines is oak. People love to put French oak, American oak, whatever they can. They want to alter the flavor a little bit and give it a big vanilla, chocolate, this rich, sweet flavor at the end. And that's what they're looking for. They also like to put a little sugar. California, again, because it's so warm, it's going to make the grapes grow, and it's going to have them condense a little bit, and it's going to concentrate the sugars in each grape, suppressing it, which will give you a sweeter style wine more easily. And those are all fit right into the palate of America. That's what we like to drink. We want slightly sweet wines. People all the time say, I want dry, and they really want sweet. That's popular. Now you go farther to the south, right? You go into the Robles region, which is just north of LA, San Diego, and when you get into that region, Cab, Chardonnay, they don't really grow very well because of Paso Robles. What grows in there really well is Zinfandel, Grenache, Syrah.
And this is in the southern part.
This is farther to the south, so the climate becomes warmer, there's more sun exposure, they get almost twice as much light, and as a result of that, the grapes have more time to basically bake and shrivel up and become more of like a raisin on the vine. And that's why when you taste a grape like a Zinfandel grape or a Grenache Syrah mix, it's much more fruit forward. It's not necessarily sweet, it's just fruitier. You also almost always get like a spicy element, and believe it or not, it's actually part of that comes from the sun exposure. It changes some of the characteristics of the wine, and it's going to give it that spice note to it. So when you go and you start talking about a Napa wine, you open up our wine list, and someone says, tell me about the Buehler Cab, and you see it comes from Napa, I can instantly tell you, okay, well, I know that it's going to have, well, it's probably going to have it, most likely. I mean, there are always exceptions to the rule, right? But it's going to be big, because it's from California. California likes to over-ripen the wines. It's going to probably be slightly sweet. There's going to be a lot of fruit flavors. California's great, no matter where you go in the state, having very fruit-forward wines. They're probably going to incorporate oak, just like you said. And the wine as a whole is going to be medium to heavy bodied, whether it's red or white. Even a white Chardonnay is always heavier bodied in California because they have more time. You're going to get more tropical fruits, or if it's red, you're going to get more bright cherry fruits or bright blackberries. It's going to be big fruit-forward flavors. That's what California can do because they're getting so much more sun exposure. It's giving it more time for the grape to ripen. They also have a shorter winter. They have an earlier spring, a later fall. So they have a longer growing season, so it means there's more time for the grapes to be able to grow on the vine, which again incorporates more fruit flavors. So when you start hearing California, you know that that is the norm. It's going to be fruit forward. There are exceptions, you know, and we have exceptions on the wine list, by the way. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to find out that that's kind of the style that you're going to find in Napa, or in Paso Robles, or in Santa Barbara, or in the Russian River Valley. You know, these are all regions of California. They all have their unique things that do work and don't work. But on the whole, they're all going to be, for the most part, fruit forward, big, sweet, vanilla, chocolate. So just characteristic flavors you're always going to see in this. Now let's go farther up the coast. Let's get into Oregon. Now, what is Oregon? Has anyone been to Oregon before? She's here? Great.
She looks like she brought wine, so maybe we might just want to touch base.
Okay, well then we'll put us on a hold now that no one's here in just a moment. Because I got to go meet with the wine rep real quick. The world. However, they're also one of the largest consumers of wine in the world too, so they consume all their own wine.
Argentina.
Most of the wine that you get out of Argentina, if you go down to the actual place, is cheap. They're overproducing, and so the wine gets watered down. It's not really all that good. There's actually only a few vineyards that are just starting to come out, and that's what's getting those are the vineyards that are getting all the world attention. Malbec, as you know, actually, what do you know about Malbec?
I know that it is about halfway in the medium.
Okay.
I know that it's a medium body.
Malbec is a medium bodied wine, usually soft when it comes to tannin and fruit structure. The other trademark characteristic that you see a lot, especially with Argentinian Malbec, is that it has a smoky quality to it. Now, Malbec is originally from France, basically a bastard grape that France decided they wanted nothing more to do with. It burned all the grapes out of their vineyard. seriously, they got rid of it, and they found it down in Argentina, and it's since caught on. Malbec is unique in the smoky qualities. It's kind of similar to Grenache, only more traditionally in the Malbec you're going to get more red fruits than dark fruits, so you're going to get more red raspberry, you're going to get red currant, you'll get every now and again I've heard someone say cherry, so those are the kind of more predominant flavors that you can get with Malbec. And then whereas it also will usually have some sort of smoky or smoke element, whether it's leather or smoke or coffee. So it's a smoother, easy to drink wine. And this is where basically Argentina, so far, because it's such a young region and there's been so little attention to it on the global market, it's putting all its meat and potatoes into this one wine. And then everything else they're just working on improving. And that'll slowly get attention as time goes on. So even though grapes are old, the vineyards themselves are great. You go over mountains over to Chile, and it's kind of interesting. Chile is actually better known for premium wines than Argentina is. Chile, on the other hand, doesn't really quite have an image yet for a signature wine. They're still working on it. The wine that's most likely to take place is Carmenere. Carmenere is still kind of an infant, though. They're still working with it. It only got recognized less than 10 years ago as a distinct varietal. And so it's very new to the market, and the market's not quite sure how to handle it.
But you said it's a better quality one.
No, they're wines in general. There's more care to quality. They're being more selective on the vineyard. So they're going to prune back more of the vines during the budding sequences. They're going to do more to make sure that the grapes that are growing are better quality grapes, so they're getting a better quality product. That being said, it's still nationally recognized as the value market in the world, because even though Chile's taking all this time for quality, their labor costs and their import costs and everything are so incredibly cheap. It's still a cheap bottle of wine or proportionate to how good the quality is coming out of it. A lot of their wine that we can get for $10 a bottle, we could get here for about $15 to $20 a bottle for the same quality. That really comes more into labor than actual quality issues. Not that they're selling a cheap wine, they're selling a good wine cheaply to help get their name out there. Other than Carmenere, Chile does a lot. They actually have one of the more versatile ranges. So Merlot, Cabernet, Sauvignon Blanc are all bigger names. Semillon to a lesser extent, and then the list just keeps going on from there. Reds typically have been growing better than whites. They're just starting to find regions for the white. And the thing about like Carmenere, or actually about any of these wines that we're talking about from Chile and Argentina, big unique thing is that they're all wines original to the original rootstock, and they're more than 150 to 200 years old. The reason that's such a big deal is this is the only place left in the world that's not been affected by phylloxera, which is the blight that affects grapes. They're finding that there's a lot of little nuances that have been missed on the modern day grapes.
Cholesterol?
Oeellixer.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
Basically,
is that something that ruins grapes?
no. Basically, it's a little insect, like an aphid.
Oh, okay.
And what they do is they nest and they destroy crops in a matter of weeks.
Okay.
Back and forth. The place that didn't have the grafting problems and didn't do it was all down in South America, because those were brought in by the Spanish, and they were brought in before the disease struck to the north, and then it was abandoned because the Spanish were done filtering gold, so it was abandoned when the disease was going on, so it never got affected. And by the time they went back to the grape areas, it didn't matter.
Huh.
To the Merlot grape, actually. For the longest time, they thought it was Merlot.
Relative to the...
Yeah, relative to Merlot. Carmenere typically displays, especially from Chile, it displays slightly smoky aspects. It's typically smooth, jammy, and red and black currants are the two predominant flavors that you get with Carmenere. In fact, that's part of the problem is that they can't seem to get away from the flavor of currants in most of the wine. Currant? Currant is a grape-like berry. Tart, kind of looks like a pomegranate seed, and tastes like a cross between a grape and a pomegranate. Black currants, of course, going to be heavier. See it a lot in old like currant jellies.
Yeah.
Other than that, you know, it's very similar to Merlot or to Malbec in the sense that they're all smooth, easy to drink wines that are going to be appealing and friendly to an amateur or to a beginner. None of them are in your face, tart or acidic or heavy in tannin structure. They're all simple. And from that standpoint, and that's part of the reason why they've been getting so much national appeal, is they're an easy starting point for people that aren't too used to anything other than house red wines. It's a good starting point for them because they're going to be safe wines to start with.
So somebody who says, oh, I don't know what I like, I think I like red, we should be like, oh, try Malbec.
Or a Merlot, or a Carmenere.
Do we even have that for Carmenere?
No.
Okay.
But if we did on a feature, they're all safe bets to start. And at the very least, it's a good starting point. You find out the person says, oh, it's too light, well, then that means that you know that you need a really big in your face.
Yeah.
And it also means if they say, well, it's really heavy or it's, you know, it's really too much, smoky and whatnot, well, then you know you need to get into a Pinot and get a really light wine because it's right in the middle. So it's a good starting point to kind of figure out where a person's going to go. Especially, like I said, if they know nothing about the wine world. It's a good starting point. It's a good point for other people that
You mentioned that, I don't know if it's like a
It's a good point to start if the person's willing to experiment. So, continuing on with the New World, let's go over to Pacific Ocean and let's talk about Australia and New Zealand. Both of these two regions had grapes within about 20 years of each other, grown, and they both had, they were both recognized with the market within a decade of each other. Both of them, again, have only been on the markets for about 30 to 40 years, so both new. Well, we're talking, we're going to separate it. Just kind of, this is generalities. They're both newer markets, just like South America is. So let's start with Australia, because they're a little bit more rooted into what their traditions are. Australia, Susan, seeing how you're back there, I'm going to make you talk for a moment. What is the most commonly known wine for Australia?
Is it Sauv Blanc?
Shiraz.
Shiraz. I was going to say Shiraz. I didn't. Okay.
So
Never mind.
Australia is known for two things. They're known for Shiraz, which is probably what they're most known for. They're also known for basically a 2-for-1 deal or mass producing. Yellowtail is probably what would come to mind first.
Yeah.
They're great at making lots of wine, very good and very cheap. And they actually did that intentionally to get people to pay attention to them. Yellowtail is responsible for somewhere in the, someone's saying number like 80% of all domestic sales out of like Walmart as an example.
What, Yellowtail?
Yellowtails. And if you taste Yellowtail, not necessarily their entry level, which is what most people have unfortunately, but if you get into like their Y series and some of their next grade up, their reserves, they're really good for $10.
Yeah.
For $10, it's a good wine. The problem is that they're so oversaturated that people just kind of start to associate it with cheap. It's the same problem that Behringer had, the same problem that Banfi and Gallo had in the past. Southeastern Australia. Barossa over here is probably the most popular and well known. But that accounts for basically 98% of all wine out of Australia. Now, when we're talking about wine, I just mentioned to Susan, Australia is mostly desert. Okay, so this area, if you look, is more fertile. They do have waters that are coming up off the Arctic to help keep it cool.
I thought we wanted desert though, because you want your grapes to fertile.
Dry. You don't want a lot of moisture. That's why they do so well, is because there's very little moisture coming in off the desert. But at the same time, they're also getting cool air that's coming in off the ocean from northern current. And so those two parts of the climate are really affecting how the grapes grow there. It's why Shiraz is always going to be, at least from southeastern Australia, it's a big wine. Definitely going to heavy body. It always has a lot of fruits, black fruits, so black raspberry, red raspberry, black currant, blackberry even, and spice, lots of spice, whether it is pepper or white pepper, or you start getting into some of the other spices. There's nutmeg, cinnamon. It's a big, bold wine. Black raspberry, blackberry, black currant, mostly black and then of course with introduction of oak, that they can change a lot. Australia goes back and forth. What Australia is really known for is what's called fruit bombs. Which is, as the name suggests, it's just an oversaturation of fruit on the tongue. So you get really fruity, not necessarily sweet by the way, but really fruit-forward, fruit-driven wines because the region is just so warm that the grapes have more time to be able to ripen before they're harvested. On a smaller market.
It kind of sounds like Paso Robles.
Very similar. Very similar. Paso Robles gets more rainfall.
Yeah. But as far as like
And characteristics, they're very similar. Australia gets a little less rainfall, and they also get a cooler climate because they're getting those cool trade winds coming in. So it works just a little bit better. It took them a while to do this, though. They horrendous. Yeah. Now you go over to New Zealand, right? Which is basically two little islands, and they're 1,000 miles away from Australia, by the way. They're not exactly close. This is the farthest south of any vineyard in the world. The New Zealand vineyards are. And they get a lot more cool climates than Australia does. Because it's so much cooler, they don't really do quite so well with red wines. Because red wines usually want a little bit more heat, so they have more time to ripen. But they do some phenomenal, delicate, tart, crisp Sauvignon Blanc. And Sauvignon Blanc is easily New Zealand's most famous grape. New Zealand and the Sauv Blanc, we have a few representations. Kim Crop is probably our most popular. The Three Stones comes to mind. We used to do Santa Maria, which is another really nice, easy to drink Sauv Blanc. They have a couple regions, and their regions are on both their North Island and their South Island. Just gotta go fast. Australia. All the way on the South Island. Pretty descriptive there. Most of the wine comes out of Marlborough, which is where you hear most often, which is down over, should be over here. Yeah. Monkey Bay is more where you see cheaper wines up here. But this is where most of the money comes from, the North End. Most of their select, their small little mom and pop vineyards are on. So they also do a pretty good job with Pinot Noir because they have so much sunlight. So have you ever seen the movie Lord of the Rings? It's probably the easiest way to describe what New Zealand looks like.
I mean, I have, but I can't tell you.
New Zealand is just like picturesque. You basically got just these amazing mountains right through both islands. And then on the other side, it slopes down and has these gently rolling hills. And so the mountains will draw most of the water, so they're not getting too much. But because of where they are and where the trade winds are at, they don't get much cloud cover. So it's sunny all the time down in New Zealand. And that's why Pinot flourishes so well. But because it's so cold, Pinot doesn't get that chance to fully mature. And so they're usually picked a little bit younger. As a result, just like the Sauvignon Blanc, they will have...
Pinot Gris or Noir?
Noir. Pinot Noir. Both the Pinot Noir and the Sauvignon Blanc are a little bit more tart and light than what you find in a lot of the rest of the wine world. That being said, they're still very full flavor. They're just a little bit more on the refreshing side. So, for example, Pinot Noir is sour cherry, it's pomegranate, it's red currant that might be a little underripe. So it's tart, and then at the same time it'll always be lighter things like violets or maybe even like lilac. They're not overpowering flowery flavors of Pinot Noir. Whereas your Sauvignon Blanc is light, it's airy, it's crisp, it's full of citrus. This is where most often you're going to find grass notes. When people start to say things like it tastes like grass clippings or they smell straw, that more often than not comes from New Zealand. That has to do partially with just the soil that they're working on. It's a nice, sandy, rich soil.
So what's the characteristics of their Sauvignon Blanc?
It's light. It's citrus focused, and then from the citrus, it's also going to have like a delicate refreshing. It's a crisp one. Almost all Sauvignon Blancs out of New Zealand are lightly oaked. They don't usually put a lot into it, and so that usually means that they're delicate and crisp. Very easy to drink. More of a summer style, because it's basically
So wait, is there a Monte? Where's that from?
Chile.
It is Chile.
Chile. And actually, that's not Sauvignon Blanc. It's called Sauvignon Nobles. It's an artificial Sauvignon-like grape. It has nothing to do
So
with
wait, when they order Sauvignon Blanc, we're supposed to be serving it, right?
No, there's Chile. They mixed Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and this other grape together in all the vineyards. And so the vineyards are really actually a mutation of all three of those grapes. And it's really just done with hundreds and hundreds of years of those grapes inbreeding with each other because no one took care of the vineyards. But when you go and you get Sauvignon Blanc from Chile, 85% of the grapes are not Sauvignon Blanc. So your chances are you're drinking something that is only partially Sauvignon Blanc, and that's other grapes.
Only has to be 75%.
Well, they call it Chile calls it Sauvignon Blanc because they're not sure, and it's easier to lump it into something that people are familiar with. But it's not quite a Sauvignon Blanc that we get out of Chile yet. Sauvignon Blanc has only been recently started to get grown into the region, so it's a new and up-and-coming grape. And honestly, there are regions in Chile that can probably make something a lot better than anywhere else in the world. They're brand new, so they don't have time to really do it yet. And because they have so many mutated vines that they really almost have to just destroy everything that's there and start over from scratch. So they got a lot of work ahead of them. That's why they're putting their keys more into Carmenere, just because Carmenere isn't mutated, so it'll be easier to make sure that they can get that as an easy standalone product until Sauvignon Blanc catches up. And that's going to take 30 more years, unfortunately. New Zealand is South Africa. South Africa is probably the smallest representation on the wine list. I think I only have 1 or 2 wines total on it, but I've done a few features, and it's something that the rest of the world has only recently even started to pay attention to. Of all the New World places we've talked about, South Africa is the oldest, and they were also the most inexperienced for the longest amount of time. When you think of South Africa, in general, when you think of Africa, you think of really warm weather. And with the exception of South Africa, that's pretty much true. South Africa gets all this wonderful cold water coming from the Arctic Ocean, or from the Arctic, and so that'll help cool the coast. In fact, the coast is so cool that a lot of grapes don't even mature fully, so it's actually more like northern Michigan, further whites in some of those regions. But when you go inland, it's more traditional of what you think of for Africa, with nice warm climates. The grapes are able to cook onto the vine more, and they'll get ripe, sometimes even overripe. So they actually have a little bit more difficult of a pattern back and forth, but they're able to cover quite a few grapes. Right now, their biggest 2 names, unfortunately, are Chenin Blanc and Pinotage. Neither of them are nationally They're varietals. Pinotage is the hybrid. It's a mutation. It was a genetic mutation created by South Africa, which is it's a mutation of Pinot Noir and a Hermitage. And so those were the 2 grapes that they basically blended together, and that became Pinotage.
So it's an actual varietal.
It's an actual varietal. It's a recognized varietal. It's a mutated varietal. It was mutated 200 years ago, so they've had a lot of time to start to work it out. It's still a newer grape though, and they're still trying to get to their point. And South Africa's not sure if they want to latch onto that as their trademark wine. They're more famous right now for Chenin Blanc, which again, Chenin Blanc is a wine that's not hugely Chenin, Chenin. It's another grape that's not hugely known on the world market. Chenin Blanc is very similar to Sauvignon Blanc, with almost some Chardonnay-like elements to it. So, while South Africa is kind of figuring out where they want to go, they're having moderate success with Syrah and Cab as well. All of the grapes, on the other hand, have a very interesting character. Because the grapes are so old, you know, they're planted back in the 1600s, so they've had more than 400 years to grow in this region. A lot of South Africa's soil is red clay, and if you've ever been to Oklahoma before, red clay, it's very nutrient rich. It's a lot of minerals.
So you're going to taste it.
And you taste the minerals in almost every wine I've ever had out of South Africa. So for the whites, this is a great thing because that means that a white is going to be high in minerality, which is always it's going to be crisp, it's going to be clean, it's going to be elegant, well polished, and it'll refresh your palate no matter what you eat it with. And that's actually a hard thing. There's not many areas in the world that can do that with their grapes. South Africa is one of them. They just got to develop it better. With their reds, what happens is it almost gives this element of like cedar and rust with the minerals and just how predominant they are. So you just get a lot of really unique spice-like qualities through it that you really can't find anywhere else in the world. And it's one of those wines that most people that try it for the first time either instantly fall in love with it and want it more, or, well, not so much hate it, but they just kind of get thrown off because it is so unique to the region.
And we have South African Furno, is that one?
We have a South African Cab. We have one on the menu right now. We have a Sauvignon Blanc on our 295 menu.
Okay.
And then we have had a couple cabs in the past.
Okay, the Cab is what.
And we also had a Pinotage.
Yeah, I remember the Pinotage.
Yeah. All cabs that I've had out of the region, you know, they're always going to be medium to heavy body. They're not fruit forward though. They're fruity. You know, you have your blackberry, you're going to have your black currant, you're going to have cassis, depending on just how much the vineyard itself is going to cook the grapes. What happens more often is the minerals come through, so you get a little bit more wood, you get more reserved flavors at the end, whether it's cedar, whether it's tobacco, or leather, or smoke. Those are all things that are kind of limited to coming out because of this type of soil that they're working with, and also the oak exposure that they're so good at exposing the wines to them. So on the whole, that's basically a quick summation of the rest of the New World on what we feature. You know, real quick, I can list a couple of other areas on grapes that are up and coming, at least in the world market. None of them are really that popular though when you start working with it. So, you know, Michigan would be one. They're still small. New York is another. And then Canada. Those would be the three for North America that I'd probably say are worth mentioning. From South America, they still have some work. And I wouldn't even mention North Africa at this point. You know, those are probably it for America, and as far as the rest of the world goes, no one's quite got an eye on it. I mean, right now, the other thing that you see a
So
lot
we're
more...
Michigan's recognized for being like up and coming? And
Not at all.
No? Okay, I think so. Like really
We're
recognized.
We're recognized from a country as up and coming, and because we work in Michigan, and because we are part of America, Michigan is becoming more of a spotlight in the Americas. And so for where we work, it's definitely something to note, something to talk about, and there's a lot of appeal from a national standpoint. From a global standpoint, there's just about zero. In fact, I mean, this book is a great example. This book is written for a global thing. The extent of Michigan is 2 paragraphs back in the glossary.
Really?
Michigan, that's it.
Huh.
You know, but you look at Michigan, Michigan didn't have a single grape for wine until 1970. And so from 1970 till today, that's where been trying to put all of our emphasis on grapes. So our grapes are just too young. They're not even 30 years old. They need at least 80 more years before they're even going to become viable enough for people to pay attention to.
So it's kind of like cloning. Like once you start a grape, it's the same strand of grape that you originally started. Yes. It's just going year after year after year.
In fact, you go into a lot of the old European vineyards, French and Italy specifically, and what they have is they basically there's I can't even think of the name of the movie, but there's a movie that explains this really well. But basically,
you're thinking of
it's with Keanu Reeves.
Oh no, I was thinking of the other one.
No, I know you're thinking of the other one. Anyways, most of those vineyards would have what was basically called like a mother hen or an alpha stock. A lot of South Africa's soil is red clay, and if you've ever been to Oklahoma before, red clay, it's very nutrient rich. It's a lot of minerals, and you taste the minerals in almost every wine I've ever had out of South Africa. So for the whites, this is a great thing because that means that a white is going to be high in minerality, which is always it's going to be crisp, it's going to be clean, it's going to be elegant, well polished, and it'll refresh your palate no matter what you eat it with. And that's actually a hard thing. There's not many areas in the world that can do that with their grapes. South Africa is one of them. They just got to develop it better. With their reds, what happens is it almost gives this element of like cedar and rust with the minerals and just how predominant they are. So you just get a lot of really unique spice-like qualities through it that you really can't find anywhere else in the world. And it's one of those wines that most people that try it for the first time either instantly fall in love with it and want it more. Or, well, not so much hate it, but they just kind of get thrown off because it is so unique to the region.
Didn't we have South African Pruno? Was that one?
We had a South African cab. We have one on the menu right now. We have a Sauvignon Blanc on the 295 menu.
Okay.
And then we have had a couple of cabs in the past as features.
Okay, the cab is what.
And we also had a Pinotage once.
Yeah, I remember the Pinotage.
Yeah. All cabs that I've had out of the region, you know, they're always going to be medium to heavy bodied. They're not fruit forward though. They're fruity. You know, you have your blackberry, you're going to have your black currant, you're going to have cassis, depending on just how much the vineyard itself is going to cook the grapes. What happens more often is the minerals come through, so you get a little bit more wood, you get more reserved flavors at the end, whether it's cedar, whether it's tobacco, or leather, or smoke. Those are all things that are kind of coming out because of this type of soil that they're working with, and also the oak exposure that they're so good at exposing the wines to. So on the whole, that's basically a quick summation of the rest of the New World on what we feature. You know, real quick, I can list a couple of other areas on grapes that are up and coming, at least in the world market. None of them are really that popular though when you start working with it. So, you know, Michigan would be one. They're still small. New York is another. And then Canada. Those would be the three for North America that I'd probably say are worth mentioning. From South America, they still have some work. And I wouldn't even mention North Africa at this point. You know, those are probably it for America. And as far as the rest of the world, no, I know you're thinking of the other one. Anyways, most of those vineyards would have what was basically called like a mother hen or an alpha stock. And it was one really, really, really old vine that everything else would come from. Okay, so for an example, in this movie, they took one of their old vines and they brought it from Italy to California, and they started to grow with it. The single one vine that they managed to transplant, because they transplanted a few only once, the one vine was 580 years old.
That's cool.
Just this ancient old rootstock, right? And what they did is every year they would take prunings off of it and they'd plant those, and those would become the new grapes.
So that's how. Okay.
That's how a lot of their cloning happens.
So that's why French and everybody has such great grapes, because their grapes are actually wines, because it's all hundreds of years years old?
Typically, it's
Flavors
considered in the
and
wine world that a grapevine needs to be at least 80 years old before it's going to start to absorb the flavors and the characters of the soil that it's growing in.
Okay.
So when you start talking about a region like Malbec in Argentina, Carmenere in Chile, you know, or you start talking about any of the other regions we did, all of those grapes have had more than 100 years to age. Even South Africa has. Michigan has. They need 80 more years before we're really going to become a viable contender on any market. New York, because they were earlier colonized, some of their grapevines are going to be 100 years old. And because of that, there's more of a difference. There's more of a bouquet, basically. There's an aroma there that's more nuanced. That's
What are they known for in New York?
White wines.
Yeah.
Predominantly whites. They're really good at Riesling, dessert wines, ice wines. They also do some really nice red blends like Cab and Merlot, basically a big Bordeaux style. That's a little bit less. It's a colder climate. The only places they really grow is on Long Island themselves, and then a little bit in some of the surrounding area.
Yeah, but we only really grow in Michigan and Leelanau, right?
We have
surrounding.
4 designated regions.
We do?
Yeah, 4. There's the Leelanau Peninsula, there's Old Mission Peninsula, there is
Which are both in Travis, right?
There's North Michigan Shore, and then there's Penn Valley.
Where are North Michigan Shore?
North Michigan Shore is basically from Holland down to what is it? Fort Smith, I think.
Okay.
And then Penn Valley is literally like a 30-mile valley within that range, and it has its own designation.
Okay.
And Penn Valley is probably, of that entire area, Penn Valley is probably the best. It's like a perfect little microclimate down there. For Leelanau and for Old Mission, because of its uniqueness with all the warm currents and air that comes in from the little 2 bays around it, they're able to mass produce wine really well. That's why you see all the bigger wineries on the Old Mission Peninsula. That's why, if you think about it, you have the Chateau Saint-Chantal, you have Great Lakes Winery, you have Peninsula Cellars. Two Lads is a new one. They're just getting their name out there right now. They're just too young, but they already got a lot of promise. And what's the other one? There's one more big producer who produces a lot. Yeah, Chateau Grand Traverse is that too. So those are, Old Mission Peninsula accounts for most of the mass-produced wines that we see. On the Leelanau, it's more boutique vineyards. It's small mom-and-pop vineyards that are more popular. You have Shady Lane, which is by far the largest on the Leelanau Peninsula for production, but you get into a lot of the other ones, the Leelanau Cellars and all those little selects. Their entire portfolio is in the range of like 5,000 cases or even 1,000 cases for the entire vineyard. As an example, Chateau Grand Traverse produced 18,000 cases of just Riesling. And we're talking an entire vineyard that maybe produced 1,000 cases in total. Or like Windcroft, which is a great example of one from downstate. Windcroft produced 328 cases of wine. And that was a good year for them. They just don't have the size. But because they're taking so much time on the few grapes that they do have, they usually make a better wine. And if you can get a hold of them, and you can afford them because they're always more expensive, they're worth it. Always worth it. Questions? I think 4 vines is the easiest way to use as an example point. Chenin Blanc typically doesn't see much oak for the most part, and they usually will make it to a drier, crisp style, but it has more body and more character and depth than Sauvignon Blanc does, which is also made about the same way. So what happens is you get a lot more mineral notes to a Chenin Blanc, typically. They're usually drier, and they still have those trademark citrus lemon lime flavors that you see in a lot of dry white wines. But they almost have more of like a bruised fruit quality that you don't see in Sauvignon Blanc.
and they don't have that tropical note that you get in Chardonnay all the time. So there is no pineapple or mango that you see all the time in Chardonnay. It's more of a crisp style that has the same body and weight as a Chardonnay.
Without the oakiness.
Well, that all depends on the vineyard. Yeah, most of the time they don't.
Okay.
But that doesn't stop some people from doing it.
Sure.
I mean, Sauvignon Blanc is the same way. Most of the people don't, but some of the best Sauvignon Blancs are oaked. Gergich is a great example of phenomenal oaked Sauvignon Blanc. Susan, what about you? What questions do you have?